It's Wednesday night, and we're trying to teach through the Bible. We're teaching the history of Israel. We began in the book of Genesis, went through all 50 chapters, went through every character, every custom that we could dig up, and all of the characters and events. And this brought us to the book of Exodus. And in Exodus, we see that Israel in the first chapter goes into bondage for 400 years. And then you're going to notice that 4 has to do with judgments of God. 4. Remember that any multiple of 10, 100, or 1,000 was the form of the original number to the Jew. And they are 400 years in the wilderness, 400 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, and that's 4, and you got 4 judgments of God, 4 judgments. The Bible speaks of God's 4 sore judgments, or 4 evil judgments, there in Ezekiel, the 13th chapter. And we also will see, as we're going through the Old Testament, God will say, if you're obedient to me, I'll fill up your storehouses, your womb. You'll have healthy babies. You'll have all the kids you want. And he says, I'll open up your wombs, you barren women. And he said, and I'll give you plenty of food. Storehouses will be full. Your enemies, you'll conquer them. It doesn't matter how many there are of your enemies. You'll go against your enemy one way, and they'll flee 7 ways. And we've seen that over and over again in many illustrations of the Old Testament. We know that Asa, the king of Israel, in the 14th chapter of 2nd Chronicles, took 500,000 soldiers and went against 1,000,000 Ethiopians who had 300 chariots of irons. That's those chariots with those scythes sticking out the wheels, and there's no possible way they could have beat them, but they did. And you see this over and over again all through the Scriptures. You see Samson taking the jawbone of an ass and killing 1,000 Philistines. One day before supper, he killed 30 of them with his hands. And I don't believe it's because he was bigger and stronger than anybody. He had taken a vow to God. He was God's man of the hour. And we see this all through the Old Testament, that whenever you follow God, he calls you to conquer enemies. But he said, if you don't follow me, I'm going to send 4 judgments. Now, we see 4 goes with 7 all through the Scriptures. God says in Leviticus, the 26th chapter, he says 4 different times, he says, I'll punish you 7 times for your sin. And each time he said this, each time he said it, he named the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and the beast. Looky there. This is very interesting. Look over here in Leviticus. God says, I will punish you 7 times for your sin. Now look here. I love this because I teach on 7s and 4s when I teach on numbers. In this 26th chapter of Leviticus, he says in verse 18, if you will not yet for all this hearken unto me, if you're not obedient to my commandments and laws, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. 7 is the number of refinement. It's the number of divine refinement. Remember, the word 7 in the Hebrew is the word Sheba. Sheba, and the word Shebuah comes from that, Shebuah, which means to take an oath to God. And the only way God can deal with us to take an oath to him is put us through trial and tribulation. And that's what he's doing with Israel when he brings them out of Egypt. He's going to take them through 40 years. 40 years. 40 years in the wilderness, put them through all kinds of affliction and tribulation, put them on the verge of hunger, where he'll rain manna from heaven, where he'll give them manna in the morning and doves in the evening, and he'll get water out of a rock, and it'll be great tribulation. It looks like they're just about to go under, and each time God will rescue them. And he takes them through the wilderness for 40 years, and Shebuah means to take an oath to God, or to give God your promise that you live righteously. Well, he takes them through the wilderness, and he causes Israel to be purified by killing off all unbelief in Israel. I'm not going. That's about Kadesh Barnea when they went into the land of Anak, and they murmured against God. So everyone 20 years old and upward had to die in the wilderness. So God says you were 40 days over there in what we call the Gaza Strip, or it's actually was the old land of the Philistines. Here's Israel. Israel like so. And here's Egypt over here, the Mediterranean Sea here. And in order to get Israel to make a promise to God, he takes them 40 through the wilderness, and he causes them to be purified. And this word Shabuah, which is a variation of Sheba, which is the word seven. This word Shabuah means 2, 7, one's self. That's what it means. And the Lord tells, Peter tells us, besides all this, give all diligence, add to your faith, in 2 Peter, the first chapter, starting in verse 5, add to your faith, and he names 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things. And he says, if these things be in you, you'll never fall. And then he says, make your calling and election sure, bebios, B-E-B-A-I-O-S, by adding these things, these 7 things. You'll be sevened, you'll seven self. So he says here in this chapter, and we've talked about the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and the beast. The beast is Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And don't have time to go into that. So he says in verse 18, if you will not yet for all this hearken unto me, I'll punish you 7 times for your sins, and I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heaven iron. There'll be no rain. That's a term meaning no rain. And your earth brass. The ground will be hard as a rock. Now I know what that means. I was raised out in Fort Worth, Texas. They call Fort Worth where the West begins. And west of Fort Worth, my grandfather had a farm out there, and we'd go out on his farm, and when they'd have a drought, those ruts would get so deep where old cars back in the late 40s had been there, and if they had a drought, it'd get so hard it'd be like it had been baked in an oven, and you can't grow anything. That's what he's saying here. He's saying, no rain, no crops. It'll be brass. That's famine, isn't it? That's famine. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits. And if you will walk contrary, so he gives you now into the next judgment. If you walk contrary unto me and will not hearken unto me, I will send 7 times more plagues upon you according to your sins. That's pestilence, isn't it? Pestilence. And I also will send wild beasts among you. He's not talking about the lions and tigers. He's talking about Babylon, Persia, which will rob you of your children and destroy your cattle and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. And if you will not be informed by me, in other words, if you won't listen to my instruction by me, by these things, but will walk contrary unto me, then will I also walk contrary unto you, and will punish you 7 times for your sin, and I will bring a sword upon you. There's the sword, isn't it? Sword, famine, pestilence, right? And we see that all through the Old Testament. You can just put Ezekiel 14 out to the edge there, because he talks about my 4 sword judgments. And that will avenge the quarrel of my covenant. I have a quarrel with you because I said you would be my people and I'd be your God, and you'll obey me. But when you're disobedient, this is what happens. And when you are gathered together within your cities, I will send the pestilence among you, and ye shall be delivered unto the hand of your enemy. If you'll notice, he inserts pestilence and sword all through here. He actually inserted the sword, but he names it here. He inserted the sword under pestilence before that when he says, I'll send wild beasts among you. The wild beast was Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. So he's naming them more. He names them specifically, but he names them more than one time throughout the text. Then he says, I'll deliver you in the hand of your enemy. Well, that was the sword where they would come into their... The sword was different than the beast. The beast is where they would be picked up and carried away into captivity. The sword would be when their enemy would come against them, and they would, all the highways that come in, it would be connected with the pestilence in many cases and with famine, because they would block all the routes away from the city, and they would besiege a city. A siege was when that the armies would encamp around it, and they might sit there 2 months till they were completely out of food in the city. And God said, I'll make you eat your children. There in the 19th chapter of Jeremiah, he said, I'll make you eat your children. What does that mean, eat your children? It means exactly that. These two women were arguing in the 6th chapter of 2 Kings, and they go to Jehoram, the son of Ahab, and say, well, we ate her son yesterday, and now we ate her son, and now we're supposed to eat my son, or we ate my son yesterday, and she won't let us have her son to eat. This was after they were dead. They were eating the babies because there was a siege, the Bible says, by Syria, and Jehoram was the king. There in the 6th chapter of 2 Kings, Jehoram is the son of Ahab. He was king after his brother Ahaziah. Now, so a siege was the sword. That was different than the captivity or the beast. The captivity was the same thing as the beast. It says it in different ways. It'll say there in the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, I'll cause your enemies to carry you away. Well, that's the same thing. Or when you see scatter abroad. Scatter abroad. That's the beast there. They'll be picked up and carried out. The sword attacks them right where they are. But the beast carries them off into captivity, and there ain't no fight to it. The beast is too big. It's an entire empire carrying Israel away. Now, then he goes on to say, verse 26, when I have broken the staff of your bread. So under this, the staff of bread was that was their food. That's what a staff of bread was. So he names here in verse 26, he names pestilence again, doesn't he? Under the sword. That's because when the sword cuts you off, you won't be able to have any food. And the Bible says down in the 6th chapter of 2 Kings, they were going to eat an ass's head. They would eat dove's dung, and they paid high pay for it. And an ass was an unclean animal. They didn't want to eat the ass's meat of any kind, much less the head. But they were doing it. And then he says, when I have broken the staff of your bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in the oven, and they shall deliver you your bread again by weight, and ye shall eat and not be satisfied. There's not going to be enough bread to go around. And if you will not at all for this hearken unto me. Okay, now he's going to give us, so in verse 21, he gives us the pestilence, the famine in verse 19. He gives us the sword in verse 25. Now he's going to give us the beast. And he intermixes pestilence and famine and sword all through here. Then he says, if you will not, verse 27, for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary unto me, then will I walk contrary to you, and you also in fury. I'll be furious with you, Israel. He's not talking to the pagans. He's talking to Israel. He says, my fury will come up in my face. And I will chastise you 7 times for your sins, and ye shall eat the flesh of your sons. I'll have you eating your children. And the flesh of your daughters shall you eat. I had a woman tell me one night, I never heard of that in my life. I never heard of Israel eating their children. Well, you hadn't heard of predestination, Christmas is pagan, or you hadn't heard that George Washington and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson weren't Christians either, have you? It's amazing what America hasn't heard. And I will destroy your high places and cut down your images and cast your carcasses. You're going to be dead when I get through with you. And upon the carcasses of your idols of my soul shall abhor you, and I will make your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries into desolation. I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors, And I will bring the land to desolation. He's building up to the beast. The land desolate means there's not going to be anybody there. When you talk about a desolate land, you're thinking about out in the middle of the desert where there's no towns or cities or no water, no food, and no people. And your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it, and I will scatter you among the heathen. That's the beast, isn't it? I'm going to have Nebuchadnezzar pick you up and carry you off to Babylon. I'm going to have the Assyrian king, Sennacherib and Shalmaneser and Tiglath-Pileser carry northern Israel off into captivity. And will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and nobody will be living there. And that happened to northern Israel in 722 BC by the Assyrians, and it happened to southern Judah in 586 by Nebuchadnezzar. And your city shall be waste, then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths. They had, gosh, I don't want to get into that. They had 70 times 7. 70 times 7 Sabbaths. They had a sabbatical year every 7 years, and they had 70 sets of them, 490 years, where they never kept their sabbatical years. So God says, I'm going to take you into Babylon. You did have 490 years where you never kept Sabbath. I'm going to put you over in Babylon 70 years. If you repent, I'm going to bring you back, restore my covenant with you. But if you don't, I'm going to measure out that 490 years. I'm going to measure that out to the end of time. And from the going forth commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, there in Nehemiah the 2nd chapter, to Messiah the Prince, when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, will be 483 years, or 69 of these Sabbaths. And then you got the 7 years at the end of time. Now, I'm not going into that right now. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, as long as it lieth desolate, as long as the land is empty for 70 years. They were carried away 586 BC from southern Judah, and they finished rebuilding the temple in 516, exactly 70 years later. And most of Israel never came back, so God ends up blinding their eyes. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths as long as it lieth desolate, and ye shall be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths while you're in your enemy's land over in Babylon. Now, I'll just give you, I'm not going to go through all the 4s and 7s. I'll just say this. Twice, we have a record of Jesus feeding thousands. There in the 6th chapter of John and over in Matthew, we find Jesus feeds 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And 2 fishes. But that's in John 6. But in Mark 8, we see Jesus feeding 4,000, 4, with 7 fish. With 7 fish. 7 is the number of refinement. This is the number of God's judgment. And it says they took up 7 baskets full of broken bread. Now, we being many are one bread and one body, we're the bread, and we have to be broken, and 7 is what refines us, is breaking us, isn't it? Is us being broken. So we're refined by being broken, and 4 is that number. Any multiple of 10, 100, 1,000 is a form of the original number. So this is a picture of the church being broken, and Israel has to be broken as it's going through the wilderness, doesn't it? For 40 years. This is very interesting to me. And I, of course, after Jesus fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish, they took up 12 baskets full of bread so that none would be lost. And in the end of that chapter, he says, there in verse 39, or verse 38, he says, in John 6:37, he says, all the Father gives me shall come to me. In verse 39, he said, of all that the Father has given me, I should lose nothing. And that's a reference back to the 12 baskets full. 12 is the number of the total church. 7 is the number of the refined church. When you find 7, you got 7s all through Revelation. You got 7 candlesticks and 7 trumpets and 7 vials and 7 angels and 7 stars and the 7 lamps and 7 seals. You got them all through that. That's nothing but a picture of the refined church. When you see the 7 stars in the right hand of Christ, and the Bible says the 7 stars are the 7 angels of the 7 churches. Angel is the word angelos. It means messenger or ministers. That's just the common Greek word. Angel is the common Greek word messenger. So when you see 7, it's talking about a refined church. That's what it's talking about in that last verse of the first chapter of Revelation. Now, and I've got 4s and 7s. You know that 11s and 2s go together. And I've got messages on 11s and 2s. What this shows is the sovereignty of a magnificent God. It shows that predestination is absolutely true. If you don't believe in predestination, that is like saying, I don't believe in kindergarten. Well, when you get to the fact that God ordained all the numbers and all the people and everybody's name and who they are and what they do and who's going to heaven, who's going to hell, who's going to live righteously, when you get to that and you get into gematria and you get into numbers, that shows the magnificence that God has ordained every atom in the universe. Can you imagine what God sees when he sees the universe? He sees all these atoms interchanging. Some of them are in our bodies, and we think we're going out here and turning right or left, and it's us. And all it is the interaction of atoms, isn't it? God's not seeing evil and good. He's just seeing atoms the way he wants them to move in molecular structure. That's all he sees. Like, oh, okay, move this and move that, and we think it's good and evil, and he says, it's me. It just amazes me. So we got the 11s and 2s. I'm not going to go with that. That's a long, long thing. But you got 7s and 4s all through the Scripture. And I just like those right there. So what you're talking about, Israel being in the wilderness for 40 years. We're going through the book of Exodus. They've left Egypt. They've left Egypt. I want us to go back over there to they leave Egypt. They leave Egypt. And that's in Exodus, the 12th chapter. They get to Sinai, or the Mount of God. They get there in Exodus, the 18th chapter. But Moses goes on the mountain in the 19th chapter. He comes down from the mountain in the 20th chapter, and he has the 10 commandments and the law written on tables of stone. Now, where we are, we're headed there. They come out of Egypt. In the 14th chapter, they have their episode with Pharaoh, where God destroys the Pharaoh's armies. And we've moved into that 15th and 16th chapter. And the 16th chapter is where God gives them manna. You have one of the episodes, there's several episodes where God has to sweeten the bitter waters. And he does that in the 15th chapter. The 16th chapter, they're traveling. I don't know where they are. I'm going to see if I can find some maps and try to follow their travels when they're coming through here. They'll wander out here, and then they'll come over back by the Red Sea. I need to get a map and just map out where they're going. It's puzzling why God would put them in the circles and the situations that they may be gone from the Red Sea for several days and then come back and plant themselves right by the Red Sea. And what caused them to do that was that cloud. Was the fire by night and a cloud by day. They're moving by day, and that cloud starts moving. It looks like a little breeze is blowing it, but it's God going, blowing the cloud, and it's going. And wherever the cloud went, they had to go. Now, where we are, we've come through most of the 16th chapter. They have come to Elam, and they've camped and moved on, and here they are. In the 16th chapter, this is the Manna chapter. This is the chapter that's equivalent to Jesus saying he was the manna that came down from heaven. He called himself the true bread from heaven. he doesn't mean he was this literal manna over here in the Old Testament. He means this is a shadow, and he is the bread that came down through the womb of Mary. We don't celebrate Christmas here. You can't celebrate the birth of a living God. The only thing you could celebrate would be the body being birthed through her birth canal, but he was God before he ever entered her birth canal, before he ever entered her womb. So all you could do is celebrate the flesh, and that's not what we're supposed to do. First of all, the early Christians didn't celebrate birthdays. Now, we've come through this chapter, and God has given the commandment of the manna, and we've gotten down to verse 27 of this chapter. And he's talking about, for 6 days, you'll go out in the morning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you'll get enough manna for the day, for everybody, all they want to eat, but don't keep any for the next day. If you do, it'll have worms in it. It'll be very distasteful. And he says that if you gather it, and it'll be filled with worms, it'll be rotten the next morning. So he says you gather enough to eat on the first day, second day, third day. This is actually Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And on Friday, which was the eve of the Sabbath, that's what they called it. They called it the eve of the Sabbath, or the preparation of the Sabbath. They were to gather enough for 2 days. And God saw to it that it did not rot. It wouldn't rot. It would be fresh for the next day, because they couldn't work and gather manna on the Sabbath, which was Saturday back then. The word Sabbath means rest. We don't believe we believe the Sabbath is every day. We rest in all the things that God has preordained. And we enter into his Sabbath by belief, the 3rd and 4th chapter of Hebrews says. So that was kept over to the Sabbath, and it was fresh, and worms didn't get in it, so they got enough for both days there in that 16th chapter. In fact, if you look here let's read 27 down to the end of the chapter 16. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the 7th day for to gather manna, and they didn't find any. They're not supposed to be out there gathering on the Sabbath. They're ignoring God's word. I wonder who that reminds us of. America. And the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? He said, I told you there wouldn't be any manna out there on the Sabbath. You don't believe me. You say, what's wrong with going out there and looking? God said, don't do it. Gather enough on that 6th day for the 7th, and it'll be fine. It'll be fresh as can be. Verse 29, see, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide, stay in your house, every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place, out of his house, wherever you're abiding, on the Sabbath day, on the 7th day. Sabbath worshipers think that they're supposed to gather together on Saturday. Let me ask you something. What day is Saturday in Germany? What day is our Saturday in Germany? What day is our Saturday, our 7th day in Tanganyika, if it's still there, or in Russia? You understand what I'm saying? That's ridiculous. First of all, the Sabbath day was for Israel, for the Jews. They couldn't have any fires on the Sabbath. Therefore, they had to light the candle before sundown on Friday. You can't drive a car. You're lighting fires in that cylinder. You're not supposed to be doing that. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't cook on the Sabbath. You can't contribute to somebody else's sin by saying, cook me a meal and I'll pay you for it. You can't do that. You can't have any pleasure. You can't watch any basketball games on Saturday or any college football on Saturday. People don't really want to do the Sabbath the way they did in the Old Testament, do they? It's ridiculous. They say, we've got to go to church on the Sabbath. Right here it says, stay in your house on the Sabbath. Doesn't it? Don't go anywhere. Well, they were out there trying to gather manna, and God says, you're ignoring me. I told you to stay home. So the people rested on the seventh day, and the house of Israel called the name thereof manna. It was of coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Now, how would you like to eat vanilla wafers for 40 years? No bananas. No banana pudding. Vanilla wafers for 40 years. That would be boring. But whatever it was probably it was better than any health food you could come up with, because God brought it down from heaven. It was a picture of Christ. It was pure. And Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commandeth, fill an omer of it, to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. And Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot of this manna, and put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept in your generations. And the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. The testimony was short for Ark of the Covenant. Ark. Ark of the Covenant. The manna was kept inside the Ark of the Covenant. Well, let's look at that over here in Hebrews 9. Look at this in Hebrews 9. I'm going to start tying together the book of Hebrews as we teach through the Old Testament. Hebrews. Hebrews is not written to a bunch of Hebrew Christians. It's written to Jews of the heart Christians, Gentiles. Why would Paul say all Scripture, and this always gets me, 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture is given by inspiration from God and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, for correction, and instruction in righteousness. Well, is the Old Testament Scripture? Is the book of Hebrews Scripture? That means Hebrews wasn't written to a bunch of Hebrew believers only. It was written to us. We're Jews of the heart, aren't we? Aren't we the temple of God? Aren't we priests and kings? Remember, shadows and very images, the law having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image. The image is New Testament, Israel, the church, the spiritual Jew, spiritual circumcision, spiritual priest and king, spiritual temple of God. That's us. We'll look over here in Hebrews 9th chapter. This is talking about us, the spiritual tabernacle. Well, he says that. He says that in chapter 8. In chapter 8, verse 1. Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest. Previous chapters is talking about a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Jesus is the high priest of this temple of God now, and he's sprinkling our hearts, whereas the high priest in the Old Testament went in once a year and sprinkled the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark of the Covenant was Aaron's rod that budded. The Lord said, bring 12 rods, one from each tribe, and the one that I cause to sprout and resurrect and come to life, that'll be the high priest. Now these are dead sticks. And God touches one of them and it begins to sprout. He says, and that was Aaron's. He said he'll be the high priest. So Aaron's rod that budded, inside the Ark of the Covenant will be the law written on tables of stone inside the Ark. Now, the law is written on fleshy tables of our hearts, and we rule with the scepter of righteousness, which would be equivalent with the scepter of Aaron. And the manna was inside the Ark of the Covenant. And if Jesus is the manna come down from heaven, he's in our hearts, isn't he? So the manna, or the Word of God, is in our hearts. He said, this is the bread from heaven. And he said, bread is my flesh, and the flesh is the veil. And inside the veil is the Ark of the Covenant where the manna is kept, isn't it? So that's a picture of us. Now look here. He says, we have such an high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heavens. When you see right hand, don't Don't think that God is a great gray-headed God sitting up there on a throne in heaven, and Jesus is down here at his right hand sitting on a smaller throne. Right hand merely means the position of authority in the kings of the ancient world. Their sons would sit at their right hand, the one who is going to be king. And Jesus is the prince. He's Messiah, the prince, who is going to be king one day. He was presented as prince. He was presented to be king when they were saying, Hosanna, God save the king, there in that 19th chapter of Luke. So he's presented as king. Now look here. We have a high priest, a minister of the sanctuary, verse 2. And of the true tabernacle. Well, there's the a tabernacle was a mobile temple. Right? There was the old tabernacle over there. Now, are we not God's tabernacle? We are his tabernacle because he lives in us. He lived in that fire, and he'd come down and sat down on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Well, if the Ark of the Covenant is sprinkled and our hearts are sprinkled and we're elected to obedience in the sprinkling of blood, then his throne is our hearts, isn't it? It's very figurative language. If you can't think figurative and think in parables, you can't understand the Bible. It's really funny we can do that in our society. Hey man, that's cool. That's my favorite idiom. Well, that don't mean the guy's 38 degrees or 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a metaphor. It's figures of speech. Now let's go back over here. For every priest is ordained to offer gifts. Wait a minute, I didn't finish up 2. A minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. Man pitched this one over here. This is the tabernacle in the wilderness. That's what we're talking about in Exodus. There's the tabernacle that God gave him instruction to build, and we're going to get into that in Exodus. We're going to get into this construction of all this border around it. We're going to get into this construction of the tents and the tent pegs and the posts in it. That was the tabernacle of God. Now we're God's tabernacle, aren't we? So everything we see in there is a picture of us. Then he says, which man pitched? God pitched us, didn't he? By the way, the word pitch in the Old Testament is the word kafar. Pitch the ark within and without with pitch. It means to cover. Second word pitch, kofar, means to stain or to dye. And this word kofar, this word kafar, is the same word atonement. And it also means to pitch a tent. So this is the tabernacle that God has pitched us over. And if you have a tent, there's somebody living in it, isn't there? This is the tent of God. And in the 5th chapter of 2 Corinthians, Paul says we're longing for our house from heaven. This is the house we live in, or the tabernacle we live in right now. And we're longing for that new tent or that new tabernacle, or that a tabernacle and a temple are the same thing. A tabernacle is a mobile temple. We're moving around, aren't we? Doing the work of God. We're going through the wilderness just like they were over there. Then he says, for every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices, wherefore it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also to offer. That's talking about Jesus had a sacrifice to offer. And he says in that 10th chapter that he offered in verse 10 of the 10th chapter, by the which will, well, let me read 9. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first. Look here. He takes away the first that he may establish the second. That's us. See that? Now, that he may establish the second. These are shadows and images. And then he says, verse 10 of chapter 10, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Well, that's the only sacrifice. Because he says, this man have somewhat also to offer. Well, this man, it's talking about previously about Melchizedek. He had something to offer. And what was his offering? Himself. Wasn't it? He gave his body a sacrifice for us. Back to chapter, well, wait a minute. Let me get on down through here. And then he says, verse 14 of chapter 10, for by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. By one offering, by his own body, a living sacrifice. So you go back to chapter 8. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts. This man have somewhat also to offer. That's Jesus offering himself. This whole book is about how Hebrews is about spiritual Israel, the church. In fact, he speaks of heavenly Jerusalem, the church, there in the 12th chapter, doesn't he? Verse 22. For if he were on earth, if the priest forever after the order of Melchizedek were upon earth, Hebrews was written after Jesus had ascended, wasn't it? Wasn't it? He should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer according to the law. Those were priests, those were Levites, and then they had a high priest out of Kohath. Kohath was the son of Levi, and he had a son, Amram. And Amram had three children specifically, Aaron, Moses, Miriam. And Aaron, out of Aaron, would come to the high priest. Or that would equate with Melchizedek over here, and the Levites is the priesthood over here. So the Levites is us, and Jesus as Melchizedek answers to the priesthood of Aaron. Now, he says, for if he were of earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow, the skia, the shade. That word shadow, skia, same word in 10 and 1. It's a shade. All those in the Old Testament were just shades. The real thing is us. The real high priest is Melchizedek, Christ, and we're priests and kings. We're only kings because Christ is in us, and they said where the king was, the kingdom was consummate there. So let's keep reading. Who serve unto the example. Hupodema means imitation. The Old Testament was just an imitation. An imitation is not the real thing, is it? Hupo. H-U-P-O. D-E-I-G-M-A. It means an imitation. It means actually to set under the eye. It means an illustration. It's nothing but all this in the Old Testament is nothing but an illustration of the real, the new, that's us. And Christ is the priest after the order of Melchizedek, and he comes into the temple of God, which is us, and goes through the veil, which is his flesh, which is his bread, which is his body, which is the church. And this was called the house of God, and Christ is the son of his own house. Whose house are we? Because he lived between the cherubim, he lived in the temple of God. He lives in us. All Hebrews is a picture of spiritual Israel. Let's keep reading. Who serve for an imitation and a shade or a shadow of heavenly things. And we're the heavenlies. He's brought us to heavenly places there in Ephesians 1 and 4. And Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. And we're going to get into that in Exodus. For, see, saith he, that thou makest all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount. We're going to get to the mountain in that 19th chapter, and we're going to study the mountain experience all the way through the 10th chapter of Numbers. And he's going to be given the pattern or the tupos. What if I said type? Resemble. The reason people can't, Hebrews is supposed to be the most difficult book in the Bible to study according to many men. That and Revelation. They say, oh, you can't understand it. That's because they don't believe in spiritual Israel. That's why they can't understand it. It's not hard at all when you actually can picture and see the spiritual circumcision, the spiritual Israel, the spiritual priest and king, etc. And he said, it's according to the pattern shown in the mount. But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is a mediator of a better covenant than the first one to the literal Israel. It's a spiritual covenant. He goes on to say that, which was established upon better promises. New Testament, the Old Testament, they couldn't keep the law of God. He said you weren't able to keep that. Peter said, why are we going to saddle the Gentiles with something even the Jews wouldn't keep over here? They didn't like the rituals. Isaiah said in the first chapter, he said, I will away with your rituals. Get them out of my sight. They were here for an example, pointing to Christ and the church, the New Testament church. For if that first covenant had been faultless, what's that talking about? If this temple over here and this tabernacle over here had been without blemish, without fault, without any hitches to it, he said, then should have been found, no place have been sought for the second. What if I said the New Testament as opposed to the Old Testament? To understand the spiritual Israel, we have to study this over here. But this one wasn't without fault because the people couldn't abide by it. He says, I'll make my Israel spiritual, I'll make my circumcision spiritual, and I'll write my laws in your hearts, and I will afflict you and put you through tribulation just like I did them to make you willing to serve me. And that's why we have to go through tribulation and affliction, because there's none good. Then he says, verse 8, for finding fault with them, he saith, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, I will make a new covenant with the house of spiritual Israel. That's what he's talking about. And with the house of spiritual Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the Old Testament in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. It won't be that covenant. When we get to Sinai, everything will be tougher than then. It'll be in the heart. And then after you look at a woman to lust after you've committed adultery with her in your heart, whether she's married or not. That's tougher than thou shalt not commit adultery, isn't it? Whoo-wee. Because they continued not in my covenant, old Israel didn't, I regarded them not, saith the Lord, and I called my people by another name, Isaiah 65 says. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel, with spiritual Israel, after those days, saith the Lord, I will put my laws into their mind, and I will write them in their hearts. Instead of on tables of stone, and kept inside the ark of the covenant. And I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest, in the kingdom of God, which is the church. You won't have to tell people in the church, know the Lord, like they had to do over there, because some of those people didn't know God coming out of Egypt. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more in this new covenant. In that he saith, a new covenant he hath made the first old. That's the Old Testament. He didn't do away with the law. He only blotted out the handwriting of rituals. He hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. So he's talking about all the rituals over here. The law is still here, except it's a spiritual temple. That's us. It's spiritual circumcision. That's us. Now, look at chapter 9. Then verily, the first covenant. As I've said before, when you see CHAPTER 9, you got verse 1. CHAPTR and 9 and 1 are not in the text. It was rolled up on a scroll. It was one scroll. So he's still talking about the first and the second covenant that he started in chapter 8, isn't he? He's talking about a new and an old covenant, a New Testament and an Old Testament. The old hasn't been done away with, just the rituals. Israel is as spiritual as they've ever been. It's in the church. And he says, and the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and worldly sanctuary. It was a worldly sanctuary. That's that tabernacle over there. For there was a tabernacle made, the first, wherein was the candlestick. The first tabernacle, which means the outer sanctuary, there was some candlesticks out there. This is what he's describing it. He's saying, and he calls this right here the first tabernacle. And this is called, the inner sanctuary is called the second here. That's what he's talking about. In the first was some candlesticks. That's what he says. That's in the old covenant. There was a tabernacle made, the first wherein was candlestick, and the table of showbread up here. Table of showbread. And which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle was called the holiest of all. This is called the Holy of Holies in the second tabernacle. This is called the Holy of Holies. This is called the holy place out here. This is the Holy of Holies because God came down once a year and sat upon that Ark of the Covenant on the 10th day of the 7th month, September, October. All right. And then he says, after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the reason it says the golden censer, they kept the altar of incense out here. Some of the writers tell us what they did. They would take fire from this altar here. That's where the fire had to come from. Any other fire was illegal. Taking fire off the candlesticks was probably what Nadab and Abihu did. Nadab and Abihu. Those were the two first sons of Aaron in the 10th chapter of Leviticus when they offered strange fire to God. They had to take a censer and take coals off of this altar here. There's 6 pieces of furniture concerning the tabernacle of the temple. The brazen sea, made out of brass. Some say it was a mixture of copper and another metal. This was brass or brazen. But these 4 pieces of furniture in here were beaten gold. And that's a picture of us being the tabernacle of God, and we have to be tried like gold in a fire. The trying of your faith is more precious than gold that precious, though be tried by fire. Count it in all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing the trying this trying of your faith works patience. So we have to go through fire and to beat. We're like gold. We're like beaten gold. God has to beat the impurities out of us. Now, where was I? All right, after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest, which had the golden censer. They would take the censer, was made of gold. They'd take fire off the altar, some of the writers said. They would bring it in here. They would take a handful of this incense. Some say that frankincense was in that incense, and it had other ingredients, but nobody knows what this ingredient is. And this ingredient would go up as a sweet-smelling savor to the Lord. But they would take the fire, put it in the golden censer, take some of this incense off the altar, come inside this veil, which is his flesh, the bread, the body of the church now. And some say he would lay the censer between the cherubim, and their wings would go and touch the other side of the tabernacle. And that they would lay it there, and that it would make foggy all inside that area in there, and then the high priest would come in, get down on his face. And if he looked up at God, he died instantly. dead. No man could do that. So he had to kind of keep it real foggy in there with that incense, and it would be a sweet-smelling savor to God. And the prayers of the saints in the 4th and 5th chapter of Revelation, now that's what the prayers of the saints are. Now let's continue. So it had the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant, overlaid round about with gold. And inside the Ark of the Covenant was the golden pot that had manna. That's exactly what he said over there in that 16th chapter, in that 33rd through the 35th verse of the 16th chapter of Exodus. Keep it. Do I think that manna stunk? I think God had kept it as fresh as the day that he brought it down from heaven. Every day. If it was a picture of Christ, it certainly didn't get worms in it. Not the part that was kept inside the Ark of the Covenant. It had the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, that's over Numbers the 17th chapter, and the tables of the covenant, the tables of the testimony, or the tables of the law that written by the finger of God were inside that. 3 things inside this. The pot of manna, and the law written on tables of stone, and Aaron's rod. And we'll get to Aaron's rod that buds over in that 17th chapter of Numbers. Let's read a little bit more of here. He said, over it the cherubim of the glory shadowing the mercy seat. I got much to say about that. They were over the mercy seat. If you looked at the mercy seat from the end or the back, they were over like this. And they would touch the side of the wall. So these, I can't draw one, so I'm not going to. The wings would come over here and touch the side and touch the side. So these cherubim, and you had 2 of them here, and you had 2 of them sewn embroidered into that veil. They were 4 cherubim, and we find these 4, back to that. We find the 4 which had the face of an eagle, the face of an ox, the face of a lion, and the face of man. And those are the 4 that God established his covenant with Noah when he came out of the ark. Established his covenant with the fowl of the air, the eagle, with the cattle of the field, the ox is the king of the cattle, with the beast of the field, the lion is the king of the beast, and with man. So when you see these 4-faced creatures in Ezekiel, the 1st and 2nd chapter, you see them in Ezekiel, the 10th chapter. You see these 4-faced beasts in Revelation, the 4th chapter, and you see these 4 beasts opening up the first 4 seals, which is the sword, the famine. Well, actually, it starts off with the beast, the sword, the famine, the pestilence. So there's the 4 beasts, 4 seals. So when you see these 4-faced beasts, that's merely an abstract picture of God's protective covenant to his believing people. It doesn't mean any more than that. When you see the 4 angels going out to seal, the 4 messengers, it's speaking of the same 4 beasts. Don't mean there's 4 cherubim flying around somewhere with 4 faces on it. I don't know whether they had 4 faces, or if one of them had the face of an eagle, another one had the face of an ox, another one had the face of a lion, another one had the face of a man. I don't know whether they had 4 faces, and nobody else knows that either, but we do know there's 4 faces there. Now, where was I? Let's read on down, because my favorite verse in all the Bible about spiritual Israel is verse 8 of chapter 9 of Hebrews. And he goes on and he says, the cherubim over the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly. And when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. So all the Levites, priests, would come in here. The priest that was not high priest on duty coming in here. the priest would come in there. This is talking about worldly priest. But in the second went the high priest alone. Once on the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement. 7th month was Tishri. That was September, October. Every year, not without blood, he went and took the blood of a goat off this altar and sprinkled it. Christ became sin in our place, or as a substitute for us. He was the goat in our place. But in the second went the high priest once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors, the things ignored, the sin ignored of the people. The Holy Ghost, now I love this verse 8. The Holy Ghost, this signifying, delao, making plain by words or declaring, D-E-L-O-O. To make plain that the way into the holiest, the way into the Holy of Holies, was not made manifest while this first tabernacle was still standing. The way into the holiest of holies is into our hearts. That's what he's saying, isn't he? Is that hard to understand? That's like falling off a log, isn't it? That's an idiom. That's easy to do. If you get up on a log, it's easy to fall off. Just amazes me that everybody misses all this. Say, this book is too hard to understand. What are you talking about? It's because you don't believe in spiritual Israel, the church. Heavenly Jerusalem, the church. Circumcision of the heart. A Jew is not outward, but of the heart. And as many as walk according to the rule of a new creature, and circumcision availeth nothing. He says, but as many walk according to the rule of a new creation, peace be it upon them and upon God's Israel. There in Galatians, the 6th chapter. So he says, while the first tabernacle was standing, when Jesus nails all that to the cross, going into the holiest is coming into our hearts and sprinkling our hearts, isn't it? Somebody tell me yes or no. Isn't that what it is? Just as sure as people get to look at me going, which was a figure. Parabole. You know what all this was in the Old Testament? It's a parable. It's a parable. Means to lay down, cast down beside. Para, B-A-L-L-O. That's where it comes from. To throw beside. Here's the Old Testament. Here's the New Testament, Israel, the church. All you have to do to understand the church is study the Old. And you can see it. And he says, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to conscience. And he goes into all of this, and he goes into the New Testament down there. He says the New Testament is a force after men are dead. When Jesus said this is the New Testament in my blood, it didn't take force, and everything wasn't blotted out till he was nailed to the cross that same day, about 12 hours later. Now, in fact, verse 22 tells you the sprinkling, what the sprinkling of the Ark of the Covenant is, of chapter 10. He says in verse 1, the law having a shout of good things to come, and not the very image. And he says in verse 22, let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled instead of an Ark of the Covenant. Is this too difficult to understand? It's not hard at all, is it? If you believe in spiritual Israel. But you'll never understand Hebrews without believing that. And he says, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Pure water was called living water. Living water was called pure water. They said the living water was in those deep rivers under the ground, particularly Jacob's well. And Jesus called his word in the 4th chapter of John living water. He tells this woman, I'll give you water and you'll never thirst again. It'll be living water. It's amazing to me. They don't compare Scripture with Scripture. And goodness, I could stay on the book of Hebrews. I love this book because I understand it's about us. Hebrews is one of the best books to understand spiritual Israel. But you got to keep remembering definitions all the way through it. So I'm going to tie Hebrews with this as we study. Is that okay? Okay. Now let's go back over to Exodus. Leaving Egypt. And he says, let me read it again just so you can get a clear picture of it. And Moses said unto Aaron, verse 33:16, chapter 16, verse 33, take a pot, put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations, for every generation that comes along. And it'll be as good as the day I brought it down from heaven, because Jesus said, I am that bread from heaven. And we being many are one bread and one body. Why are we the bread? Because Christ the bread lives in us. Right? The bread is the Word of God. This is not, I don't believe that anything is hard if you go back to the basics of it. I don't believe algebra is hard. I don't believe chemistry is hard. If you ever find out how important knowledge is, you could actually learn anything you want to learn. I don't believe knowledge is hard. Do you? Now, you've taken all those genetics. I don't believe genetics is hard if you pay attention and look at it. I believe it's a matter of concentrating on what you're wanting to learn. The reason I believe most people don't learn, they hate concentrating. They like to go relax and watch TV. They want to go bowling instead of studying the Word. If you will come to the realization that everything you read is important in the Bible. I used to be reading along and I'd say, let me skip this and get something interesting. Has anybody ever done that? I used to look at the word edify and say, well, gosh, that's a difficult word. And who knows what that means? Let me get something interesting. Now I love to teach on edify. Building up the house of God, and here's the house. And what is it builds up the house of God? What is it that edifies? Love. Agape, walking in God's commandment builds up God's house. We build up one another when we walk in the commandments of God. I'd get to a word like that and I wouldn't take time for it. Now I realize I'll pick up one of my Hastings or McClintock and Strong, and I'll just read. I'll find a word I'm not familiar with, and I'll go down into it. I go, oh wow, this is one of the things I've been looking for. I don't even recognize the word when I start reading it. You know how much there is to learn in the Bible? Forever. That's the only way I know to describe it. I believe that this book is magnificent. The reason people don't believe it's magnificent, they don't believe God ordained everything in an exact fashion. They don't believe in the sovereignty of God. That's why they don't believe it's magnificent. You have to believe God's ordained everything for it to be interesting. Don't you? You do. Now, let's get back over here. Now, 17th chapter, the people start murmuring against God again. But like one of the writers said, some of the people that were weak, God noticed that God didn't kill them after their first few murmurings. He doesn't threaten to kill them till he gets over there in Numbers. Says, I'm fed up with their murmurings. And God called these, in Hebrews, the 3rd chapter, he calls these the days of provocation. They're provoking me to anger. To provoke somebody, you keep jabbing at them, don't you? Hey, God, you keep punching God in the ribs. After a while, he says, hey, stop that. I whipped Pharaoh's armies, and you think I keep saying, do you think you've got battles to fight that you can't win? Well, you can't. David said, Lord, you plead my cause. You fight for me. Plead. When you see the word, it's usually the word rube. R-U-W-B. If you go to a circus or you go to a fair, those are carnies. Most of them live in Florida for the winter. Have their fairs through the summer and the fall and through the spring. And when you get to a fair, they all know each other. And if you get in there and throw one of them little balls at those little bottles, you're not going to knock them over unless they want you to. Don't you know they've got a little pedal there, and the one bottle, you knock 3 down and you get something off this shelf. Don't you know it's a con? They got a little magnet there, and they will take their foot off or put it on, and that bottle ain't coming down. It's strong enough to hold the biggest piece of metal in the world. What do you think they're doing? Certainly they're cheating. You'll notice them throwing those basketballs, and some guy's really good at throwing a basketball. He'll bounce all over the place. That's because the ball is slightly bigger than the basket. And when you see them throwing up there and they're getting it right and left, it's a smaller ball. Don't you know that? The fairs are a con. You hadn't figured that out yet? And if you start a fight with one of them, they will holler, "Rube!" And every carny will come and beat you up. That's that word rube there. We got a rube over here. He wants to start something. Hey, buddy, you want to start something? You see, the 20 of us, we're used to fights. You got to fight all of us. They don't care if they cheated you or not. If you go to the fair, expect to be crooked. That's the way it works. If we guess your weight, if we can't guess your weight, you get one of these little items right here that we get 100 of them for 10 cents. And you get one of these, it's like you actually believe they're going around trying to give stuff away that's worth anything. And you win one of those straw little bears that's stuffed with cheap stuff and cheap material, and the stitching comes out before you get it home, and you spent $35 to win it, and it's this tall, and it cost them about 75 cents. Don't go to the fair to win something. I mean, good grief. Nobody wins at the fair. You're just going to have fun. That's all it's for. If you do that, expect the little stuffed bear to cost you as much as, oh gosh, you could get you a great big one, this big, stuffed real good and made of real good material for your little kid if you went to a Toys R Us and bought it for the amount of money you're going to spend on one of them. Let's get away from that. All right, now let's go over here. In chapter 17, all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of sin after their journeys according to the commandments of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. There was no water for the people to drink. We've already experienced this before, hadn't we? Therefore the people did chide with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said unto them, "Why are you giving me a hard time? Wherefore do you tempt the Lord? God brought you here." And the people thirsted there for water. Cool, clear water. And the people murmured against Moses. "You brought us here to die, Moses." The New Testament has much to say about murmuring. We're not to be murmuring with one another, gossiping or griping or complaining. This is all the sovereign will of God, everything you're going through. Who's in charge of all these 2.5 million people out here? Who brought them out here? Do you think God brought them out here to die? Do you think God brought you out there to die or to sink in all of your despair? He didn't bring you there. I mean, he said, "Lord, I'm with you always, even to the end of the world, and I'm going to teach you that, but you're going to have to get old to believe it, because when you're young, you just don't quite believe it." Well, I believe God up here in my mind. I can't get it down in my heart. That's pretty hard to do, isn't it? Just believe God for everything. Me and Robert were riding up to Gallatin this morning. We're headed towards Gallatin. We kept talking about, well, we need to learn to quit getting upset and angry at things that happen, because Robert said, it is what it is. And I had on a T-shirt that said, "Predestination, it is what it is." I mean, and the old fellow said to me down at the grocery store one night, I was talking about these people didn't like what I was saying. He said, "I don't argue with anybody about anything. It is what it is." It is what it is, and you can't change it because you don't like it. God made predestination what it is, and you can have a whole world vote against God, and he says it's still what it is. Amen. Forget trying to figure out God and saying, "I don't like it, so I'm going to make it something else." No, you can't. It is what it is. People don't want to believe that because they want it to be what they want it to be. And it's not. That's right. It is what it is. He is the Theological Word Book talks about the isness of God under the haya, the verb to be. He says He is. They didn't use past tense verbs in Hebrew. They said be or is, but they didn't say was or were, because they said God is. And they didn't say the Lord is God. They said the Lord God, because He was the only God that was God. If they said the Lord is God, they said that's static language. They lost the power when you use the word is. It's like saying the Lord God. They said, you don't say the Lord is God. He is the only God, so therefore the Lord God. They never said the Lord is God. Now, where were we? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? The people thirsted for water and murmured against Moses. Here they go again, one more time. And said, wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and cattle with thirst? Jim Brown, you're leading us off into oblivion, and you say you're God's leader, but you got us out here and our families hate us, and my boss hates me, and all my neighbors hate me, and all my kin folks hate me. What did you bring us out here to die? I'll tell you, when you first come to the truth, it is bitter. Well, it's sweet the first time you hear it. And what makes it bitter is you go back to your family and say, my family's going to love this. Boy, wait till I tell them the truth. And you tell them, they go, we don't believe that. You're following a cult. You can give all the information in the world. You know why people say it's a cult? That we're a cult? We are a cult. We're not occult. And that just shows you don't even know what to call us. Cult means to cultivate, and all the early Christians were called a cult of Christians. You cultivate. Occult means to hide. But the reason they do that, it scares them. They've never heard this information before. They've never heard that God doesn't love everybody. They've never heard that God predestined His family to conform to the likeness of Jesus. They've never heard that Christmas and Easter are pagan. Even if they've heard it, they're not used to it, because all the world believes Christmas is wonderful and it's Jesus' birthday, and which it isn't. It's paganism. And they believe that they got free will simply because they can get up and walk down the aisle. And they think things are true that are not true, and they don't want to be uncomfortable, and they don't want you to mess up their feather bed. And they're happy with status quo. We like things like they are. I'm sorry, God's Word is what it is. Deal with it. I'm either telling the truth or I'm lying. If I'm telling the truth, the world is in trouble. And if these other guys are telling the truth, we're just a little bit fanatical. We're not in trouble. I've told people that. If what I'm saying is true and you don't believe it, you're in trouble with God. And that's the truth. Only few are going to find this narrow way, and the rest are going to resent it and hate us for it, just like they hated Jesus, like they hated Paul. Verse 4, Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They're ready to stone me. They want to kill me, God. And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hand and go. Notice God is not mad here. He doesn't get angry enough till he's prodded and been provoked so much, and then he's ready to kill all of Israel. You say, well, if this is all the will of God, why is God getting mad at it? I keep saying, God has to create His own wrath if He's going to have any. You can't have wrath without having something to be angry about, because the people aren't doing righteousness. And in order to have mercy, you can't call God merciful if everybody goes to heaven. Because mercy means someone is in trouble and God's going to have to deliver them out of it. So to have wrath, you got to have mercy on the opposite end. To have sweet, you got to have bitter. To have up, you can't be up and have no down, can you? By definition, you can't have an up without a down. You can't have a down without an up. Well, I was up on top of the building walking around on the ground. Well, Mo, you must have jumped off the building and sprang with your feet or something, because that ain't possible. So when God creates his wrath, it's because he wants to. God willing to show the wrath of the people and make his power known. He endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath. He endured with much long suffering the vessels of the orge. Orge is the anger and revenge of covetousness. When he says that in Romans 9:22, God willing to show not his wrath, the wrath of the people. It's orge. The King James Bible says his. It's O-R-G, Ada. Feminine gender. It's feminine because this is a Babylonian wrath. Babylon is the mother feminine of all idolatry. And that was founded on self. And self is nothing but fighting over what you want. That's your orge. And he says, take the rod in your hand. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Now, how many people are there? About 2 million? At least 2 million. It's not some rock like the Anglo-Israelists say that's on the throne of the Queen of England. That ain't going to get enough water. Her sitting on that throne, the Anglo-Israelists say she sits on the rock that was in the wilderness. This has to be a river to give that many people drink, doesn't it? It has to be a river of water. Let me show you what the Bible says this rock is. It's amazing what God speaks of when he talks about the rock. Look over here in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. How much time do I have? 11. Oh, gosh, I ain't hardly getting anywhere. Tonight, I'm going to keep teaching on Hebrews in this series. 1 Corinthians 11. I'm going to take some time on the rock because there's so much to this. Moses is told to smite the rock. Here later on, he's told to speak to the rock. And later on, he doesn't speak to the rock. He hits the rock twice. And God says, you rebelled against me, and for that reason, you're not going to go into the promised land. When he hits the rock twice. He tells him to hit it here, but he tells him to speak to it later. Now, look here in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. Moreover, brethren, verse 1, I would not have you to be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. We've been talking about that, hadn't we, in the 14th chapter of Exodus? And were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Now, baptism wasn't the water. They weren't washed in the water. The water was the judgment of God that came down upon the arms of Pharaoh, wasn't it? As 8 souls were saved through water, it says by water there in 1 Peter, that 3rd chapter, verses 21, 22. It says as 8 souls were saved by water, but the word is not by, it's the word dia. It means through. The water was not the baptism, not with the people in the ark, and not with Moses. They were baptized through water. Remember, baptism is blood, isn't it? Blood. He says they were baptized through. Both of these are going to be comparable to one another. The water outside the ark was the judgment of God. What saved the people in the ark was the pitch. It was a red-stained caulking. They caulked the boats. It was a natural asphalt. Some said it came out of the ground. Some said it came out of trees. We're not absolutely sure. Well, we know it was red stain, which is a picture of a blood baptism. The baptism had to do with the death. It was separating them from, we're a picture of them coming out of Egypt. Egypt is a picture of the world. Baptism is a blood baptism separating us from Egypt. The baptism was a figurative thing. This is talking about figurative language here. It's not talking about they were washed. That water was the judgment upon Pharaoh's armies, just like the water was the judgment upon the people of the earth that weren't inside the ark, wasn't it? What saved them in the ark was the kafar. Pitch the ark within and without with pitch. Cover with a stain or dye. Baptize comes from baptizo, and bapto means to cover with a stain or dye. And that was a blood baptism. So when they were baptized, they were separated from Egypt, death to the old man in the world, unto new life in tribulation and fire and trials. Right? That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about they were washed in the water. The water never touched them. They walked through on dry ground. God sent an east wind all night long, and it blew that floor clean till it was dusty. I believe they walked through where it was just dry as a bone. God knows how to stir up a wind and make it just blow so hard that it'll dry it like a desert sand. And we did all eat, he says, we're all baptized unto Moses in the cloud. The cloud was leading them across the Red Sea. You see that? It was the cloud that was baptizing them and separating them from Egypt, which is a type of the world, taking them into the wilderness, which is a type of us going into tribulation and trials. And did all eat the same spiritual meat. Huh. Well, that's something, isn't it? What was the spiritual meat? It was manna from heaven, which was actually obedience to the Word of God. God says, here's your bread, but do what I tell you to do. If they were obedient to God, he gave them the manna. And did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. He's the true rock, isn't he? True rock over here, and you got a rock all over the place over here, don't you? David spoke of Christ the rock. And then he says, but with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness, and they were all killed over a 40-year period. So when they're going to cross the river, when they get to the place of crossing the river, here they are. Here's Israel. Here's Egypt. They wander in this wilderness for 40 years. And then they come up here just north of the Dead Sea, and they're going to cross the river. Here's the Sea of Galilee up here. And they're going to go in and possess the land. I was going to give you something. I forgot what it was. I got so many things going on in my head. Where was I? Oh, I was reading over here. And he says in chapter 10, when they get, with many of them, God was not well pleased. He killed off everybody that he wasn't well pleased while they were in the wilderness. When they come up here to cross the river, Israel is a righteous people. All of unbelief has been killed off in the wilderness. They're righteous people. So when Joshua in Deuteronomy calls them all together, and he says the same things over in the book of Joshua, he calls them together, and he says, Moses tells them in Deuteronomy, he says, choose life. Who is he talking to when he says choose life? People use that to say, I see, predestination is not true, and you got free will, choose life. It means to select living as believers. And Joshua tells them the same thing when he says, in that last chapter of Joshua, well, look over there. I've got a little bit of time left. Joshua, maybe I do. 4 minutes, okay. Look here. Joshua 24th chapter. Chapter 24, he says, verse 14, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth. He's about to cross the river. He's going over there to divide up the nations among the tribes. Well, who is he talking to? He's talking to a believing Israel. He's not talking to unbelievers. You understand that? How do we know that? Because God killed off unbelief in the wilderness, didn't he? So he says, put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood. He's not talking about Abraham, and he's not talking about some of the descendants of Abraham. Because remember when Abraham, in the 22nd chapter of Genesis, he sent his servant Eliezer up to the land of Haran to get a believing wife for his son. So he's talking about many of the fathers on the other side of the flood serve idol gods, but not Abraham and his bunch. And Abraham traces all the way back to Shem and Noah. So he says, put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood, and in Egypt serve ye the Lord. Now he's talking to believers only because that's all that's left in Israel, all right? And he says, and if it seem evil unto you, serve the Lord. Choose you this day. And people will say, see, you got choice. This is not a choice for unbelievers to believe God. This is a choice for believers to serve God or serve evil. He's talking to believers only. He says, choose you this day whom you will serve, believers, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites. He's not saying choose between good or evil, is he? He says if you're going to go after other gods, either choose those gods on the other side of the flood or choose these evil gods over here. You can't use this verse to say, see, God's giving you free will. That's dumb. God's saying, if you're going to go after evil, choose those gods or these gods. You're not going to choose me. He's actually doing the same thing that I do up here when I say, look, choose to serve the Lord. Live righteously and godly, and don't go after yourself and your cars and your things and your stuff and your status. He's saying the same thing I say from the pulpit up here. Don't I tell you that from time to time in different words? Serve God, not yourself. He's saying that same thing. Are you going to serve self? Are you going to serve your car? Are you going to serve your house? Are you going to serve your job or your jewelry or your money? He's saying you're going to serve the gods. He says, you righteous people, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And he says, that's what I want you to serve, and I tell you that from time to time. Serve God, not yourself. Now, gosh, I've got so much on the rock. I'm out of time. And right? I'm going to come back and talk about the rock, how it's used all through the Scripture. I'm going to stay in Hebrews. I've been trying to figure out how to teach Hebrews, but I think it would be great to teach it while we're studying this. Right? This would be the perfect place to study it, wouldn't it? I love teaching. I hope sometimes I'm reading Exodus, I think, I wonder if this is too boring for the people. I want you to be able to get a hold of it. It's a lot of characters, a lot of people. It's going to be kind of like 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles. I did about 85 or 90 messages on the history of Israel teaching for 1 Samuel. I'm going to try to do the more thorough than I've ever done on that history. Mary loves that. I'm sorry she's not here. She's very sick, having some problems with her health. But pray for me that God will help me to exegete this and present it to you properly. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for truth. Thank you for your word. God, help us to continue this message and this truth. Open up this book and make it plain before us. God, I pray for the flock here. I pray that you'll strengthen the sheep. Cause them to be strong in truth. Mature them. Teach them to add these 7 things to their faith and cause them to be 7 before you and keep the oath that they promised you. And God will praise you for all things. Lead us to your elect. Open up many doors for the ministry, and I'll keep preaching this truth, Lord. You've put it in my heart. Help the others to do the same, to witness for you. We give you praise for everything in Christ's name. Amen.